Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week's video is going to be the fourth and final part of our series about learning how to Leyn Torah according to the Binder trope. What are we going to be doing today? Everything that we haven't done already. So that is the Zarka Segol formula and the extraordinary signs, aka the signs that are so rare they only appear like 1 to 5 times in the entire book. And those are Shalshelet, Fula, Karne Fara, and Yerach ben Yomo. So that's it. Let's get started. We're going to start today with the final of the regular trope formulas, and that is the Zarka Segol formula. What does it look like? The Zarka Segol formula is made up of 4 parts. The first part is a munach, which is a reversed capital L underneath the word. The next one is where we get something that's different. We have the Zarka. What does the Zarka look like? The Zarka looks like an S that has fallen on its side. The closest thing that I can say it looks like is there's a particular music ornament that looks like it. So if you're familiar with music, you'll understand what I mean when I say the Zarka looks like that, but otherwise it kind of looks like a weirdly fallen over S that is on top of the word. The next one is another munach, which again, as we've said, looks like a reversed capital L at the bottom of the word. And then finally, we have a segol. What does a segol look like? A segol looks like 3 dots that form a triangle on top of the word. If you're familiar with math, it looks like the therefore sign. It's 3 dots forming a triangle, and this triangle is pointed upward. So what does this sound like? It sounds like this. Munach Zarka Munach Segol. Is there anything that you notice about that particular trope? Yes, the Zarka does sound very similar to Reviya. What is the difference between the two? Well, Reviya sounds like this. Reviya. Whereas Zarka sounds like this. Zarka. It starts a bit lower and it also ends a bit lower. So keep in mind that the Reviya and the Zarka sound very similar, but they're not exactly the same. How do you practice? The Zarka Segol formula actually appears in the Shema. We're back with the Shema paragraph examples. The third tzitzit in the third paragraph of the Shema happens to include that trope in it. And I think it's V'haya lachem litzitzit. That is what it sounds like in the Shema. So how do you practice? Well, this particular formula has a bunch of different combos. You will always have the Zarka and the Segol. So at minimum, you will have Zarka Segol. The question is, are you including either of the munachs? If you're only including the first munach, it sounds like this. Munach Zarka Segol. If you are only adding the second munach, this is what it sounds like. Zarka Munach Segol. You will have multiple combos, but the Zarka and the Segol are always together, and you have to have a Segol after the Zarka. You can't have the Segol on its own, and you also can't have the Zarka on its own. I can't stress this enough. They are always going to be together. You should practice by doing the Shema example if that's what works for you, but also by practicing the different combos just on their own, and then looking for a portion in the Torah that kind of works for you and just looking for examples. And once you find those examples, practice those with actual words. Let's move on to the extraordinary signs. Now we're on the extraordinary signs, aka the signs that you see so little, that you will probably forget what this trope is because it's almost never in the Torah. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start with the first one, Shalshelet. Shalshelet only appears in the Torah 5 times. Compare that to Et Nachta, which appears in almost every verse. Shalshelet only appears 5 times. So what's the point of it? Why is a Shalshelet a Shalshelet? There are 2 reasons for a Shalshelet being a Shalshelet. According to the grammatical function, a Shalshelet always appears when there should be a Segol with a Zarka in front of it, but the Zarka, for whatever reason, cannot be fit into the idea. In which case, the Segol, which can't be left on its own, transforms into a Shalshelet. That is one explanation for what the point of a Shalshelet is. The other point of a Shalshelet is actually more for emotion and for feeling. Every example of Shalshelet in the Torah involves someone who is hesitating on something. And so the Shalshelet reflects that delay. It reflects that hesitation. What do I mean by this? What does the Shalshelet look like? The Shalshelet looks like a really, really long vertical zigzag line above the word. It's not straight, it's wavering. That hesitation is reflected in the image on the mark. What does the Shalshelet sound like? The Shalshelet sounds like this. Shalshelet. As you can see, in this particular version of Shalshelet, the same motif is repeated 3 times to show that the reader is wavering in place. They're hesitating, they delay. And that is the meaning of the Shalshelet. How do you practice this? It only appears 5 times in the Torah. If you're really concerned, Google where all of the 5 times show up and just practice the 5 times. And if you internalize it with those particular words, then you're all set. Before we continue on with the next extraordinary sign, I'm going to point out a small element in the booklet. You can see there's a version 15a and an alternate version 15b. For those that really want to do the fancy version, what does it sound like? It sounds like this. Shalshelet. As you can see, it is way more ornamenty. So you can choose to do the first version or the alternate version, whichever is easier for you. And that is the Shalshelet. Let's move on. We are on the second to last formula for our learning to learn the Torah. What is that formula? That formula is the Mercha Chvula. What does the Mercha Chvula look like? If you didn't catch it, Mercha Chvula starts with the word Mercha. And we know that Mercha is the bottom right corner of, or quarter of a circle. So what does a Mercha Chvula look like? It looks really similar to a Mercha, but the difference is that, like the Gershaim, which is 2 gereshes right next to each other, the Mercha Chvula is 2 merchas right next to each other. So if you see 1, 2, that is a Mercha Chvula. The Mercha Chvula, as far as I'm aware, only appears once or twice in the entire Torah. It's even more rare than the Shalshelet. And in this case, you'll often find it next to a darga. So what does the formula sound like? It sounds like this. Darga Mercha Chvula. That is the Mercha Chvula. There's not much more for me to say about this. The Mercha Chvula is so rare. Google where it shows up in the Torah and just practice with that actual example. I will also take the time in the description of this week's video to include the exact verses where all of these extraordinary signs appear. So let's move on to our final formula for today. Our final formula for today is the Yerach ben Yomo, Karne, Fara, What does the Yerach ben Yomo look like? The Yerach ben Yomo looks like an upside down etnachta. It's still underneath the word, still with the same, conventions for syllables, but it's been reversed. It looks like the etnachta is upside down. It kind of almost looks like a tiny little uppercase Y. What does the Karne Fara look like? The Karne Fara in English means cow horns. And so, if you look very carefully at the symbol, the Karne Fara kind of looks like two horns sticking out like this. And that's why it's called Karne Fara. It is also basically a Tlisha Gdola and a Tlisha Ktana smushed together. So that is what the Karne Fara looks like. So what do they both sound like? The Yerach ben Yomo sounds like this. Yerach ben Yomo. Very simple. What does the Karne Fara sound like? Well, remember how I said that the Karne Fara looks like a Tlisha Gdola and a Tlisha Ktana smushed together? The Karne Fara is basically those two melodies smushed together. You start with the Tlisha Ktana melody, and you end with the Tlisha Gdola melody. So what does that sound like? It sounds like this. Karne Fara. Let me split those into two parts. What is the Tlisha Ktana? Tlisha Ktana. What is the Tlisha Gdola? Tlisha Gdola. You combine them. Karne Fara. And you get Karne Fara. So how should you practice? There are two ways of practicing the Karne Fara. The Karne Fara, as I mentioned multiple times, is the Tlisha Ktana and the Tlisha Gdola smushed together. So, if you practice the Tlisha Ktana and the Tlisha Gdola, you're practicing the Karne Fara. Just make sure to do them one right after the other. The other way of practicing the Karne Fara is to find the example in the Torah and to just repeat it over and over again until you've memorized it. Because it only shows up once in the Torah, it's worth just going straight to that one example, memorizing it, knowing that you will probably never see it more than once a year. Maybe record yourself doing it so that you remember that you did it at one point. But other than that, it's the same when it comes to practice. And that was all of our extraordinary signs. So we've reached the end of learning to leyn the Torah. For those of you who are following with the booklet that I've provided a link for in the description box from the previous videos, you'll notice that I skipped Formula 18 A, B, C, and D in this video. That's because I covered it in part 1. But we made it. We made it to the end. And because it's as if we made it to the end of the Torah, I'm going to throw in one more formula that you will probably need to know if you are doing the very, very last aliyah in the books of the Torah. And that is the special final book Sof Pasuk formula. What does it sound like? It sounds like this. Mercha tibcha, mercha sof pasuk. That is the formula for the end of the book. I'm not going to repeat this multiple times. If you want to practice, it's in the booklet. And so we made it. This is it. We've learned to leyn, right? No, we have not learned to leyn. I may have gone over the different tropes, but you still need to practice. Practice is key. So how should you practice once you've moved beyond the booklet, beyond picking out random verses and finding examples of all of the trope? When you are learning your aliyah, how should you practice? I'm going to give you the method that works for me. And this is the method that I use when I'm teaching my students. You open your tikkun. You open your chumash. And first pick your aliyah. Pick your aliyah and know exactly what you're doing. And then from the top, you're going to look at your verse and you're going to identify what each mark in that verse is. You're not going to sing anything. Identify. Once you've identified what each mark in the verse is, speaking it alone, you are going to move on to the next step, which is to sing all of the marks that you've just identified, not on the words in the verse, but on the names of the mark. So, let's say you have a verse that is Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Very standard verse. The first step is to identify. Okay, mercha, tipcha, mercha, sof pasuk. I've identified it. Step 2. How do you sing mercha, tipcha, sof pasuk? Mercha, tipcha, mercha, sof pasuk. Obviously, in longer verses, you will have more combos. I'm using this as an example just to show my method. If, for whatever reason, you are having particular trouble with one combo, I go with the rule of 3s or the rule of 5s. If you are very comfortable, no need to repeat. If you're a little bit uncomfortable, repeat the name of the marks and sing through it 3 times. If you're extremely uncomfortable and 3 times is not enough, do it 5 times, but no more than 5, because there is such a thing as too much practice. If you spend too long on a particular place, if you keep making mistakes, it'll just be discouraging. Stop after 5 times. More than 5 is too many. Okay, so step 2, we've sung mercha tipcha, mercha sof pasuk, or whatever other combo you have in your verse. What is step 3? Step 3, depending on your level of Hebrew, is to read through the pasuk. So in this case, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And then finally, step 4 is to go and apply the notes that you've learned about the mercha tipcha mercha sof pasuk to the actual words in the verse. So what does it sound like for Vayidaber? It sounds like this. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. You do that 3 times. Regardless of how comfortable you are doing it, you do that 3 times, and if you are a little bit uncomfortable, you move it to 5. If you are using a tikkun and you are learning to memorize the trope, there's another step to this. This whole time you've been looking at a column or a page that has the marks on them, that has the trope marks, that has the pronunciation. That is, the 4 steps that I just showed you were for you to get the hang of it with all of the vowel marks. Now, if you are actually learning with the tikkun, you are going to move to the column on the left. You're going to find your verse, and you're going to sing what you just sang with the marks, but on the left column, and you're going to do that 3 times if you feel very strongly about your memorization skills, or 5 times if you are not feeling very strongly about your memorization skills. And in that way, you imprint the association between what you just sang and the words without the vowel marks on the left column of the tikkun. And that's one verse. Once you've done one verse, you're going to go through this same process for every verse in your aliyah. And after you've done the second verse on the tikkun side, I recommend going backwards and doing the verse that you just finished. So let's say your aliyah is 5 verses. If you're doing the triennial system, that is very possible. What does that look like? You do verse 1 in the tikkun, you then go to verse 2, you do all of the steps, you do verse 2 on the left side of the tikkun column, and then 1 to 3 times, you do verse 1 and 2. When you finish verse 3 on the left column of the tikkun, you do verses 1 to 3, 1 to 3 times. It all depends on your level of memorization skills. This seems very tedious, but ultimately, the best way to memorize your aliyah and to really internalize the trope is through sheer repetition. If you've done it enough times, you don't need to repeat as much. You get used to practicing doing that. However, if you're not used to that, the repetition is key. It's tedious. It will take time. It requires discipline. But anyone can do it. Everyone has the ability to learn trope. So that's it. That's this video. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm not sure where I'm going to go from here in terms of what to teach people. If people are interested in learning a particular trope, please let me know in the comments below, and I'd be happy to create a new series, whether it's the Haftorah trope, High Holiday trope, Megillah trope. I am open to teaching other things. Thank you for being with me on this journey, and if you want more content like this, please subscribe to the channel.